A slow but steady fall, taking us to a moment that not so long ago appeared beyond our wildest dreams. Recorded COVID deaths down to 0 across the UK yesterday, a first since last July, allowing a time for reflection on loved ones we lost. A time for some relief. But not yet a time for celebration, as COVID shows it's not finished with us yet. In the 5 months since the January lockdown, COVID has slowly and then dramatically been on the wane. In recent weeks, a small but unmistakable rise in cases. A false sense of security in the eyes of some. The Kent, or now renamed Alpha variant, the cause of the spike late last year, is falling away. But the Indian, now known as Delta variant, is on the rise. Put them together and the rise looks modest. Just focus on the variant discovered in India and the rise in cases is more stark. And that mixed picture is playing out on the ground. In Scotland, a delay in the easing of restrictions as large parts of the central belt will remain in level 2. But Glasgow, which has been in the higher level 3, will move down a tier on Saturday.
And because of the vaccination programme, we can still look ahead with confidence. But, and this is the difficult part, in areas where cases are relatively high or rising, our judgment is that a slight slowing down of the easing of restrictions to allow time for more people to be fully vaccinated will help protect that progress overall.
And they're really doing well.
Pointed remarks aimed perhaps at the Prime Minister. The need for caution echoed by one leading scientist advising the UK government, stressing that he's speaking in a personal capacity.
I think most of us who are looking at the figures and are advising government would say that we really are not confident at the moment that opening up on the 21st would be safe. My view at the moment is that we have to be very cautious about opening up. We really need to watch the data over the next week or two and then really make a decision based on not only the transmission but also on the severity of disease that's being caused and whether the vaccines that are being stepped up at a greater rate now will help to control the transmission.
Pressure as Boris Johnson ponders his plan for the lifting of social restrictions in England in 3 weeks' time. Decision time is 2 weeks away and Downing Street is not yet signalling a change of tack, but it is eyeing the data carefully. Conservative MPs are watching the scientists with a familiar wariness. One ally of the Prime Minister told me he's just got to follow his instincts and unlock. Then this MP added, does he actually trust his instincts anymore? Another Conservative MP told me they did expect an unlocking later this month, though they believe there will still be cautionary measures such as the widespread wearing of masks. One Tory backbencher believes there are grounds to unlock, whatever some scientists may say.
Scientists who are just looking at one issue might come up with a different conclusion, but the Prime Minister has to look at all the issues and decide what's right. And, you know, if there are 0 deaths today in the whole of the United Kingdom, and there was only 1 death reported yesterday for the whole of the United Kingdom, it really does seem that the world-leading vaccination programme that this government has developed is succeeding perhaps even better than expected.
Calm in an era of uncertainty. Midsummer is nearly upon us when England is due to embark on a new path. But COVID is doing its best to disrupt those plans.
Nick Watt, well, joining me now is Professor Sir Mark Walport, who sits on SAGE, the Government's Scientific Advisory Group for Emergency. I'm also joined by Professor Robert Dingwall, who advises the Government on COVID policy, and Skye Gingell, a Michelin-starred chef and owner of the Spring Restaurant. Good evening to you all. Sir Mark Walport, first of all, why could it be a good idea, do you think, to delay the full opening up on the 21st?
Well, it's a matter of controlling the pandemic in the best possible way, and I'm afraid instincts is not the approach here, it's data. And as Peter Openshaw has just said, there is a great deal of uncertainty. Essentially, there are 3 moving parts. So there's the new viral variant, the so-called now Delta variant, the Indian variant, which is more transmissible, but we don't know exactly how much more transmissible. there's how people behave, and we've had an easing of the lockdown 2 weeks ago. We're only just starting to see the effects of that. And then, of course, there's the vaccine programme, which is very successful, but 50% of the adult population have only had one dose of the vaccine so far.
So when are we likely to know the link is broken between infection, hospitalisation and death? And when are you going to get this data?
Well, it will come out over the next 2 or 3 weeks. I think that's fairly clear. There'll be certainly more data for the 14th of June than there is now.
So there'll be data for a week prior to
that has always been the plan, that actually the data will be looked at a week prior. And the best way to reduce the uncertainty as much as possible is to have as much data as possible.
Is there something about the nature of risk and how our relationship with risk has changed during the pandemic? There's always going to be hotspots, there may be new variants, but the more we vaccinate, surely.
Absolutely, but I think, and we are familiar and recognise the risk associated with influenza. And to go back to your question about breaking the link, I mean, it is clear that the vaccine is reducing severe disease and deaths. So, on that side, things are going very well indeed. But there are an awful lot of people who are still incompletely vaccinated. And we will get to live with coronavirus because it's not going to go away. We're not going to eliminate it completely.
But we're not ready to live with it to the extent that we open up on the 21st.
If we opened up completely now, there's definitely the risk of a significant further wave.
Robert Dingle, what do you say? Is there anything you've heard there that leads you to favour a delay?
I suppose the one area on which I would agree with Sir Mark is that we don't really need to be having this debate at this time. And I think that I feel forced into it with some reluctance by the extent to which the fear and anxiety that has been amplified over the last year has permeated sections of the medical and scientific community and really sort of pushed this debate much earlier than it really needs to be had. But frankly, I think that we have this reluctance to trust the vaccines, and we have a reluctance to take a broader look at the social, economic, psychological damage that is being inflicted and which will be aggravated if the measure, if June the 21st does not prove to be the date on which the majority of restrictions are lifted.
So it's a question of balance. What you're saying is all those things like social, economic, mental well-being and so forth, balance out the possible uptick that we're seeing, well, the uptick we are seeing in the Indian variant, now called the Delta variant, and any possible uptick in the future in other hotspots. That balances out, in your view, towards opening.
Indeed. I think that what we're seeing is we are now in a situation where by the decision date, all the most vulnerable groups in the population will have had the opportunity to have 2 doses of the jab, to develop the appropriate degree of immunity. The virus will still be circulating among younger age groups who are intrinsically at very, very much lower risk. And we're seeing this, hospitalizations are no longer a very good measure of the risk. As Sir Mark is saying, as the Director of Public Health for Bolton was saying last week, the people going into hospital now are not desperately ill in the way that they were in January. These are people who have a mild community infection and need a bit of support with breathing. And the only way they can do that is by going to hospital to get access to oxygen and to the dexamethasone therapies that our scientists have so brilliantly pioneered.
Interestingly, Mark Walport, to a layperson, help with breathing never seems to be something that is actually mild. It may well be, but it doesn't seem that way. Are we just, again, going to have to live with the risk that some of these people who have to go in and don't necessarily respond to dexamethasone are going to become perhaps more ill?
Well, that is, of course, the race between the vaccine and the virus, which is, of course, the more people we can vaccinate. I mean, at the moment, we do know that the vaccination seems to be effective against the most severe infections, but it's not complete protection.
Well, I was going to ask you, because the date for total vaccination for the over 18s to be completed is by the end of July.
Yes.
Even on the basis of the vaccinations, would you be happier to wait till that happens?
what I want to see is the best possible data for the policymakers, the politicians to be able to decide. And so people are pressing for there is still 2 weeks of important information to come.
Do you think that's the case, Robert Dingwall, that this 2 weeks of important information could actually provide some evidence that we need to delay, or do you think we're beyond that?
Well, I think the only thing that would convince me that we needed a further delay would be a significant upturn in intensive care admissions. I mean, when you're talking about support for breathing, we're not talking here about the sort of intensive ventilation you get in intensive care. We're talking about the external oxygen therapy. I mean, basically people with an oxygen mask who are getting a bit of extra help. And I think that if we look at the modelling exercises, I think the modellers do their job for what it's worth. It's quite clear that a short further delay really doesn't make very much difference for the trajectory of this infection, at the cost of a devastating blow to national morale and to the further delay and damage to the economic and social life of the country.
At which point I want to bring in the Sky Giorgio on that very point about the economic issues that would flow from further delay. What is the uncertainty doing to your industry at the moment?
Well, I think the whole year has been such a huge struggle, and I suppose if I'm being very honest, I am very concerned. I mean, I think we're desperate to open, and it's a long haul for us to get back to normal. But the idea that there may have to be a closure further on down the line, I think is almost more devastating than waiting a little while.
So you would actually, let's be quite clear, if you thought this was the final time that you would have to consider any form of restrictions, you would rather wait before you got everything going again and had to then have further restrictions imposed on you down the line?
I would, yes.
So just, Mark Walpole, what will actually, if we're going to be clear about the 21st in June and the 28th of June in Scotland, we're talking about no social distancing, nightclubs open, football matches, the government talks about removing all legal limits. That is what is planned. Let's be quite clear. There's going to be no restrictions.
Well, that is the implications of the 21st of June as things stand. And we know that even without a new variant, there would have been an increase in cases associated with opening up.
But on that question, Sky Giorgio, that there is going to be no restriction at all, you have no concerns in the restaurant trade about that total opening up and what, the passing of infection perhaps around a table in a restaurant?
I mean, I think if the government and the scientists feel that it is truly safe, then I'm not worried about that at all. I mean, I think I can't overemphasize how damaging it is, the opening and closing that we've gone through.
And what about the position of staff and staff recruitment?
Well, I mean, the industry is in a sort of catastrophic situation, in terms of recruitment. And I think that's a mixture of the pandemic and Brexit. It was the sort of perfect storm. But I think if you speak to anyone in the industry at the moment, everybody is struggling. People don't want to come back to restaurants or to work in restaurants. I think the industry has been so damaged and decimated over this kind of 14 months. And I think people just have no faith in coming back to work. So I think we've got a really long way to kind of rebuild our kind of industry. Anyway, I think it's going to take a couple of years probably.
It's interesting you say people haven't got faith or not interested in coming back to work. I suppose in a way that's not limited to the hospitality sector. That's going to be a change in mindset across industry and commerce.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's particularly difficult when you've been in an industry that completely depends on face-to-face contact as like service industry. So during the lockdowns, we really couldn't do anything. You could adapt a little bit, maybe do some online shop, but actually to run the business as we did before, it was completely impossible. And so I think that people have genuinely lost faith in coming back to the industry. And I think they're very wary, not knowing if there will be another lockdown. And I think we were open 6 weeks last year after March the 17th. So, yeah, I think it's just, it's a very difficult time for us. Whatever happens, if we open up on the 21st of June, I think we've still got a long road ahead.
Well, I'm sure neither of our other guests can say categorically whether there would be another lockdown, but Mark Walport, is your view that no matter what, whether we come out on the 21st or the 28th, there won't be another lockdown?
Well, look, we're all desperate to get things opened up as completely as we can. And the issue with the science at the moment is that we face quite a lot of uncertainty in the data. And for policymakers to make the best decisions, they need the best data. And if we are not going to yo-yo back and forwards with restrictions, then it is better just not to try and guess or to have instincts, but to use the data.
Robert Dingwall, it's not over till it's over, and you know, of course, today the letter in the Telegraph from different organisations, WHO amongst them, saying that unless there is a redistribution of vaccines to have a global proper vaccination programme, we can't have certainty. We will not have certainty into the future. Is that your view?
Well, I think we'll have quite a high degree of certainty. I would certainly agree with Sir Mark about the need to improve the data that we have. But I think we need to recognise that, there have been trillions of replication events of the virus, out of which we've seen 4 variants of concern arise, all of which are converged on the same handful of genes and the same small area of the spike protein on the virus. I think we have to ask ourselves, what's the likelihood of a more damaging variant appearing from the current levels of circulation? And that I think is not a strong probability. And I think we have to recognise that the vaccines protect the people who get them. Especially, the 2 doses are really important. The waiting for the immunity to develop fully, that's important. Recognising that there are better vaccines in the pipeline with broader modes of action. Recognising, in fact, that a certain level of infection in the community may actually be desirable in terms of the booster effects and the broader reaction that you get from natural infection overlaid on the degree of protection that the vaccines offer.
Well, just finally, Skye, do you think this element, this double vaccination, will make a very big difference both to your staff and to customers who are coming? Do you think that would give a degree of certainty?
I mean, I think there's definitely a huge willingness for the general public. I think we've all seen it, wanting to come out. I don't think the double vaccination will solve the recruitment problem or people having faith in the industry for a while, actually.
Thank you all very much indeed.